You're listening to Energy Insiders, a weekly update on clean energy and climate policy with Renew Economy's Editor-in-Chief, Giles Parkinson, and leading energy analyst, David Leach. Energy Insiders is brought to you by Janus Electric, enabling freight operators in Australia and overseas to electrify heavy haulage. Energy Insiders is also brought to you by Pylon, helping solar installers and retailers design high-resolution solar proposals in minutes.
Hello and welcome to this latest episode of the Energy Insiders podcast. My name is Giles Parkinson. I'm the founder and editor-in-chief of Renew Economy, and joining me, as usual, is ITK principal David Leach. David, I trust you are well. I know you're very anxious to hop on a train and get to see the latest blockbuster film, but I'm sure you've got 10 minutes to talk about some of the issues of the week.
Well, Giles, I'm actually tired because I went to a very interesting Australian Institute of Energy session on data centres last night. And I think that'll be discussed, no doubt, at the Clean Energy Conference next week as well.
What did you learn? I'm kind of interested because I wrote a piece about data centres without having the knowledge and the benefit of actually being to that meeting. So
well,
I
learned
wrong.
that there's not many data centres getting built in the Ausgrid franchise, but I probably could have guessed that anyway. And that people are still, as we discussed with Nicola Falcon, the number of data centres coming and going sort of changes all the time. But I think I learnt that really there's still plenty of room to do data centres in Australia at quite competitive prices. And that's the main thing that I really took away from it.
Okay. Well, we actually raised data centres as briefly in our main interview for this week, which is with Shane Quinnell, formerly of Westwind, and now setting up his own shingle called Essence. And we had a chat to Shane, which we'll listen to in a jiffy, and then we'll come back with some of the news of the week. But look, let's start off with our conversation with Shane. Shane Quinnell, thank you very much for joining the Energy Insiders podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be here. I've been a big fan of watching your guys' Energy Insiders, so stoked to be here.
Well, it's very great to hear. Look, David and I were just trying to work out how many episodes we've done. And look, we haven't actually done a proper count up, but I think it must be about 500 at least. And this is the first one on this new platform. So touch with it works quite well. But look, 32 seconds into the recording, it hasn't tripped yet. So, yeah. You just changed jobs. You've moved on from being a head of development for one of Australia's most successful renewable energy developers, set up your own consultancy. What's prompted that move?
Yeah, that's right. Look, I suppose I've thought about setting up my own thing for a long time. And, in one way, depending on who you are, it's a pretty natural transition. I tend to just love getting things done. I love working with lots of different people. And this is a really good way to work with, the companies in the market that are getting stuff done and help them build the things we want to see getting built.
Right. Okay. And I noticed that you've got that sort of brand on your thing there. Sort of, yes. Cross my heart, sort of, yes. It's the essence of the energy transition. So you're basically out there sort of advising companies on what to do and what not to do, I suppose.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I suppose the basis of it was a couple of things. Number one, I've been in this space for probably about 15 years, both, over in South Africa, and then more recently, the last sort of 8 to 10 years in Australia. And one of the biggest things for me is the reason I got into renewables is because I believe in the transition to clean energy, and I want to see a future for my kids, and I want to, be able to be part of, I suppose, climate change and helping avoid, the biggest impacts. And I suppose for me, Essence was an ability to set up a company that can create the values that I want to see in the world and the values that I want to see in projects. So that's the essence, I suppose, that I was trying to get to.
Well, that's good to hear because that's kind of what I thought of most of the people in the industry when I sort of started out about 15 years ago or even earlier, actually. Renew Economy has been going for 15 years, although I get a sneaking suspicion that a lot of people are in there just for the money these days, but it's good to hear that some people are still sort of thinking about the essence of it work. Yeah. But look, we're not here to promote your new company. We are actually here to sort of hear your experience, as you said, 15 years in the development industry. You've had a great insight into what's good to do, what's not good to do, what the hurdles are, and you probably can't divulge anything about any specific projects. but we're kind of interested in just how difficult we've managed to make the development of the renewable energy industry. And look, we've heard, and we know that, look, a lot of it's to do with the lack of contracts, the lack of offtake agreements, the lack of finance, but there's many other things that are involved in terms of planning and some of the other rules. What's kind of like the biggest one for you that you've observed?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Giles. And I think going into it, that probably the first thing I would say is that I think at least recently, Australia's done a really good job of now defining where we want to be. So we've got targets for 2030, and we've finally sort of aligned on the fact that renewable energy is happening. It needs to happen, and coal is going out not because there's this ethical thing about it, but simply because its time is up and it's too expensive to keep running. I think the challenge now is delivering on what we need to keep the transition moving and keep kind of the lights on. The reality, to be honest, is that every delay increases cost, it increases risk, and it really reduces the likelihood of things getting built. And I think one of the big points here is that we kind of have this belief to some extent that we're sitting in a world where there's heaps of money to build these things and everyone wants to be in Australia and we just want to keep going, and that's all okay. But really, we're competing for global capital. And at the end of the day, I suppose the biggest thing is that we really need to solve the problems underneath that in order to keep capital interested in the market, in order to keep the ability to build the projects that are going to replace the Ararings and all these other projects that are going out on the coal side. So that's probably a holistic description of it. And to be honest, underneath it, you've got your constituent parts of planning, grid, PPAs, commercials, etc., which I'm very happy to dive into.
Well, look, let's go into some of those. I mean, one of you said we've got a target, but we've actually got no obligation on anyone to actually do anything, which is probably one of the problems, and why some people argue that we should have had a RET, or we should at least have something which is sort of visible and sort of fungible in terms of sort of contracts for difference. But what are some of the other ones sort of behind the scenes in terms of the planning and the connections process that you are seeing? And I'd like you to be a bit more specific here about what's really sort of getting in the way in terms of hurdles.
So I think if we start the the project journey, the way that I look at it is that you've effectively got land, which is like your foundation, and then your two next steps, which almost form the legs of the project, are effectively planning and grid. Probably the biggest challenges that I have with both of those processes, but increasingly more the planning side, is that what we've done is we're forcing projects to take decisions earlier and earlier and earlier in the planning and the grid process, well before they're ready to make those decisions. And so accidentally, we're creating an environment where, because of the lack of flexibility, we're effectively creating the likelihood of things like modifications, which then cause delays and cause frustration and all these other things. So I suppose that lack of flexibility is a problem. And we've seen it on the grid side historically, where because of the fact that when you start a 534A process, and that, just for your listeners, is the process of getting technical acceptance for your generator. When you do that, you have to effectively specify the exact plant and equipment you need to use. And what happens in that case is that 3 years before we're ready to build, we've had to specify the type of inverter or type of wind turbine we're trying to use. And it then means we're negotiating in a completely, non-commercial environment, which then creates problems for pricing, which then creates consumer energy price challenges.
So if someone wants a different brand or a different inverter or a different turbine, or even wants to add a battery, and I think we've seen this multiple times, they're just going to bugger that because it's all just too hard going through that process all over again.
That's right. And the good news story on the connections process is that there's been a heap of work done on that. So there's a group actually called the Connection Reform Initiative, which is a joint task force that got set up many years ago by people like Peter Cowling, Joseph Titchen, John Titchen and Joseph Tadich from Tesla, that effectively work together with the CEC and AEMO to solve the biggest problems in connections in the country. And I was fortunate to be part of the leadership group of that for about a year while I was at Westwind. And that was collaboration from everyone from the network service providers to proponents to AEMO to the CEC, all solving those problems. And what we've seen is that 539s, which are modifications to the 534A or technical acceptance process, historically were like, every developer's nightmare. These days, there is now a process that's accepted, in terms of the fact that you can go through it. So we've sort of partially resolved the grid process, but we're almost going the opposite way on planning, unfortunately.
In what way? Tell us more.
Yeah, I mean, so to give you a couple of examples, for a start, one of the challenges with planning in Australia, which I sort of identified quite early because I've come from the international markets, is that in Australia we have a multi-tiered planning process with, for example, the federal government EPBC process or the Commonwealth referral process, and then we've got state level processes as well where you need to get development approval. In each state, the process that you need to follow to get approvals differs. So, for example, if you look at states like Victoria, New South Wales, Queensland, they differ. In Queensland, for example, you've got the lack of a bilateral agreement, meaning that you have to get a dual permit both at a federal level and at a state level. New South Wales, there's a bilateral agreement, meaning you get your state permit and then you kind of tag on your federal permit. Now, on that, part of the challenge is that it's different everywhere, and then in different states, the treatment of projects gets treated very differently. So, to give you an example, in Queensland, at one stage, I went through a project where just to get to the point of being accepted for exhibition on a project, it took us 18 months to get there. And what we were seeing was that some of the conditions that were coming down from kind of the federal sort of bodies were at times 50 times more stringent than a project that had just been approved about 50 kilometers down the road. So we effectively pushed back and we said, look, you've just approved a project on this basis, but you're asking us to do something which is far different. What's the basis here? And by the way, this is completely unworkable. We may as well actually just give up on this project because we can't build it. But only after quite a number of phone calls did we manage to get it resolved. And then again, the challenge is that in New South Wales, for example, it's treated completely differently. So the goalposts are just in very different places in different areas.
Yeah. And in Queensland, I mean, was that sort of pre-LNP? Was that under the previous government, or is that something new that's been?
No, that was relatively recently, but to be honest, it's got nothing to do with the LNP. It's really just a function of, I suppose the way that the planning process on that particular project was being run for some, reason.
Okay. But I mean, I don't think the LNP has actually made it any easier, though, have they?
Yeah, I suppose you can see the numbers in terms of how fast projects are getting built. So, and you're probably touching on another point there, that the lack of a partisan or bipartisan position on renewables makes it really challenging, and politics does have a big impact. And to be honest, I suppose from my personal perspective, we really need to move past it, and we need to be asking the question, how do we keep Australia's lights on for the lowest possible cost to Australian homes and businesses while respecting the environment and community? And to me, the argument of should we go renewable or not is really largely over.
Except it's not.
Yeah, and therein lies the irony, right? And to be honest, it does make life challenging. So we kind of keep moving through it, but it would be a lot easier if we managed to get complete alignment and stopped asking the question.
Yeah, it would be. Yeah. What about some of the other sort of connection issues and things like marginal loss factors and other stuff like that? I mean, because there's so many sort of variables that can emerge in when people are trying to, set up a business model for their project, be it a wind project or a solar battery hybrid or whatever.
It's a really good question, and I think so. Again, just to explain how the investment case works for people like me. When we set up the idea of setting up, let's say, a solar project or a solar battery hybrid or a wind farm, we're actually looking at, potentially a 30 to 40 year investment horizon where for 30 to 40 years, we're going to be operating something. Marginal loss factors, for example, change every single year, and they can swing as wildly as, 5 to 10% in a given year, meaning that what can happen is that if we're generating, X number of megawatt hours, we just don't get paid for potentially 5 or 10% of that because the marginal loss factor's changed. The other issues, which increasingly are a big problem, is things like curtailment and congestion. So effectively, similar to on the road, where you have too many cars on the road and therefore traffic slows down, you get congestion and therefore you get curtailed and you don't get paid for all of your energy. The other one that's more recently come up is system strength charges, which effectively, if you use the market-based mechanism, change every 5 years. Now, what that all boils down to is that the Australian market has these nuances which, in a 40-year investment timeframe, can change either every year, every 5 years, etc. And it's just constantly moving. And trying to get a business model that stacks up with that volatility is incredibly challenging.
System strength charges is an interesting one because that's look, I might be wrong here. It's relatively new though, isn't it? I mean, how substantial can they be?
Yeah, that's right. So they were brought in, and I speak under correction, but it was within the last probably 24 months. And effectively, there's two ways of dealing with them. For everyone's benefit, what a system strength charge is that as we're moving from kind of fossil fuel type technologies to inverter-based technologies, system strength, i.e. the frequency on the network, is becoming a bit problematic or potentially could. And so what they're doing is that they're trying to create a mechanism to manage system strength. So it's a way of resolving that. There's two ways of resolving system strength. The one is through self-remediation, which effectively means you put in synchronous condensers or you put in grid-forming batteries. The second one is to pay through the market. And the answer, Giles, is that if you pay through the market, the cost can be really exorbitant. So you're talking about the potential of kind of $2, $3, $4, $5 million per year, depending on what your project is, depending on what your technology is, etc. And when you add that onto all of the other OPEX and etc. costs, it effectively becomes death by 1,000 costs, where your internal rates of return or your financial metrics keep going down. And coming back to that point of we're competing for international capital because we need billions of dollars to build the projects. The more that we erode returns, one of two things happens. So investors at the moment are at the point where they just can't erode returns anymore because they need certain returns to accept the risk of building projects. So either the cost of energy goes up because they passed it on to the consumer because they need higher power prices in order to make their project solvent, or they take their money elsewhere. And neither of those are good outcomes.
So, for David.
So, Shane, how's life going in the new business? The customers flooding in?
Well, the good news, mate, is that I've got my first customers. So I'm working actually with Spark Renewables, which has been super exciting, great team. So, it's early days. I've only been open for a month. But yeah, it's been good to actually get moving.
And, right now, I guess, let me ask the obvious question that what do you reckon a new wind farm that wants to get financed today, what price do you reckon it needs?
It's a really good question. Look, I suppose. So, I mean, I was having a chat to David Dixon from Rystad recently on this, and the numbers that I suppose are coming through from that side and more generally around about the $110 to $120 per megawatt hour. I think it depends on what the project is, how big it is, etc. But you're looking at potentially as much as $3.3 to $3.5 million per megawatt capex on projects these days. And
sorry, just on that number, do you reckon that's changed in the past year? That 3 to 3.5?
Yeah, I would say it's probably gone upwards. Yeah.
And do you have a feel for why that is in the past 12 months?
I mean, I suppose there's probably various reasons for that. Interestingly, at the moment, the biggest change that we're seeing is probably on the BOP side. So potentially the supply side in terms of turbines and stuff is more stable, etc. But the cost of building things is just going up.
Yeah, but I mean, that's always true. If I'd have asked anyone who knew anything about it, that question for the past 30 years, I would have got the same answer pretty much every single time. Can we point to anything? Like, is it concrete prices? Is it labour shortages and therefore skilled labour costs are high? I mean, interest rates have gone up, inflation's gone up. Do you have a feel for these things, or that's someone else's worry?
I mean, honestly, mate, I think it's probably all of the above, right? Like the global geopolitics is not helping. We've obviously seen fuel prices go up. Labor costs are going up, inflation's going up, and all of these things result in higher prices. So I think it's in the same sense that the challenges we're seeing with projects transacting and reaching construction being an amalgamation of all the problems underneath. I think the issue with supply pricing is the same thing.
So you don't see any prospect of prices coming down over the next year or two? Costs?
It's a good question. I mean, I'm an internal optimist, I suppose, and I just believe that when things need to happen, they do. And I suppose what I mean by that is that if we've got this need to build projects and projects are not getting built because costs are too high, humans are pretty ingenious in terms of finding solutions, and I believe solutions will get found. I don't know exactly what those things are going to look like, but projects will get built.
I believe you, but thousands wouldn't, because there's not much evidence that projects will get built just at the moment. I mean, my issue is that I look at the spot prices and they don't justify building anything, which is a point I've made on this podcast several times. And that's a total illusion. The government and all credit to power to say Chris Bowen will able to beat his chest and point to the fact that spot electricity prices are down. But that's not really what we're interested in. What we're really interested in is getting the new projects built so that we can keep those prices down in the future. Seems to me at the moment that as soon as a coal plant goes fut, and that will happen sometime in the next year or two, then prices will go bounding up again, and we still won't have the replacement energy. So for me, the number one issue has been for the past 12 months, and I'm so sick of saying it, I've gone to analysing artificial intelligence, because electricity is actually utterly boring at the moment. No new projects are getting done.
Oh, David, we got one this week.
Yes, in West Australia.
In West Australia.
And I think David,
but that's not even part of Australia. You need a passport. You need a passport to go there.
I've never even been there, to be honest. I mean, look, to caveat what I said earlier, I do believe projects will get built because they have to. The question in my mind is, when do they get built and what's the consequences before they get built? And I think there is increasingly that concern of we're just extending coal further and further, which, by the way, makes it harder to build renewables because the investment
my point is there's no realistic prospect of costs coming down in a meaningful way in the short term. And my personal belief is that costs won't come down until we start building projects. Right? Yep. It's when we start building them that we'll get the learning rate happening. And my personal belief is that, at least in New South Wales, the state with which I am most familiar, the New South Wales government and Energy Co have bent over backwards to make things happen. Roads have been widened, port facilities have been looked at, the transmission has been built, the developers have had everything they have asked for, they have been given, and they still can't get their projects over the line. And they will say that they can't get the prices that they want. And I'm not sure why that is the case, because whether that's just to blame the PPA providers, who are essentially the big retailers. There was talk of Snowy providing PPAs, but Snowy doesn't seem to be able to bore its way out of a hole at the moment, so to speak. I mean, the whole thing is just the CIS is clearly not working to produce to get us anywhere near the 80%. If I just want to keep running through the problems, the ISP has still got an 80% target in there, but since Queensland's not part of the ISP anymore, Queensland's not even part of Australia according to them. Therefore, all the new renewable energy has to be shoved into other states, which are still not getting any new projects. Victoria's coming up for a state election where it's not certain what the commitment to new renewable energy will be beyond the end of this year. And in any case, the current government can't decide whether it wants to do its offshore wind or not, and it hasn't got a plan B as far as I can see. So actually, I think New South Wales is the only state which could do stuff. It needs stuff. It has a whole lot of projects that have transmission, that have their EISs, and they're not getting over the line. So I think that's a solvable problem, but I'd sure like to see it getting solved.
Yeah, and I think you've touched on an interesting point there, David, which is in New South Wales, for example, why aren't projects getting built at the moment? And to be honest, I think that if you look at a lot of projects, it's because of the intersection between rising costs and, like effectively the impact that has on business case and the decreasing wholesale market, increasing costs from system strength charges and all these other things. But we've also got to realize that the LGC prices or the large scale generation prices, for example, have almost fallen off a cliff since Trump's
Yes.
come into power and since people have stopped buying them voluntarily. So we've got this strange intersection, but to be honest, it all comes back to fundamental economics.
It does. And this is my point. You're quite correct. The LGC price has collapsed, and the LGC was supposed to be replaced by the CIS. And it just hasn't been because the CIS has provided a floor. It hasn't, and people bid these prices and then they couldn't achieve them, and so they just forget about it. And all the delays that go on from when you get a CIS contract to when you build it, as you say, have raised costs another $10, $15, $20. So I think someone's got to bite the bullet and just say, we're going to get these projects built. I mean, at the moment, what's going to happen at the moment is that the Orana transmission line is going to be built and it will have to be paid for by New South Wales consumers. And if there's no electricity goes through it, that's going to raise costs for everyone. So I think that's a problem that we all need to pay a lot of attention to.
Yeah.
So Shane, here's your task. You're trying to get a project over the line in New South Wales. What do you do?
I mean, it depends at what stage that project's at, right? Like if you're early on, the big timeline is really on planning and on getting through the planning process, trying to maintain flexibility and keep moving. I think stepping to probably the bigger picture slightly, one of the things that's been in my mind recently is the fact that the energy transition is arguably one of the biggest, if not the biggest projects Australia's ever seen. I mean, we're seeing the whole network that powers the entire eastern side of the country and the western side.
It's even bigger than the NDIS.
Changing.
Sorry.
Yeah. And part of the challenge I have, honestly, is that there's the question of who is actually running it. And the answer is that there's a whole bunch of people running it, depending on which part of the transition you look at. But it's kind of like having multiple project managers for a project where there's always accountability gaps and overlaps and these kind of things. And to me, the biggest part is we just need to be more organized and more delivery focused. And the other thing is that I feel like, to an extent, what I see on a day-to-day basis and what a lot of people like me see in the development space is a focus on the perfect process rather than on outcomes sometimes. And I think the reality is that we need to keep coming back to that key question of how do we keep the lights on at the lowest possible cost for Australian homes and businesses, while maintaining reasonable environmental and community values.
It's a lot more than keeping the lights on, right? It's a lot more than keeping the lights on. This is my point. You want to do data centers, you need more energy. You want to get rid of, we've got a $50 to $60 billion opportunity to get rid of imported oil and replace, that's the equivalent of building a $50 to $60 billion export industry. And it's easy. If we had the renewable energy out there, it's as easy as just replacing the petrol cars and trucks we import with electric ones at virtually no change in capex, no subsidy required. The only thing that's holding Australia back from a great productivity jump is that we are not building enough bloody wind farms and solar farms in any state, but particularly not in Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland. And this seems to me as you talk about the planning process, but the wind farms in New South Wales have essentially all got their planning approvals or so close that you could actually commit to it already, couldn't you?
I think a fair number of the ones do or are kind of on the way to, yeah. But then again, it comes back to that piece of what are the other problems behind it, right? And we come back to this issue of PPAs and LGCs and all these other things. And I think that, there's kind of that reminder there that the projects we're working on are incredibly complicated and they require a lot of people to be involved in them.
No, they're
and
not.
a lot of
AGL, which is as dumb a company as you'll ever come across, was able to build wind farms in South Australia as fast as they wanted to. I mean, building a wind farm is not that hard. You go out there and pour some concrete, you stick some steel in the ground and a turbine on the top. It's not actually that bloody hard.
Depends on how many you're building, mate, and how big they are.
Well,
But
it's just like pieces in a jigsaw puzzle. Try telling that it's hard in China, where they build like thousands every year.
yeah, look, there's no doubt we're definitely making it more complicated than it needs to be. Absolutely. I mean, it shouldn't take 10 to 15 years to develop a wind farm.
No, it shouldn't take 10 to 15 years to develop a wind farm. You should be able to get approval in a couple of years once you've got an REZ like Central. But I don't even think that's the problem, right? The problem at the moment is, that's what I'm trying to say. The problem is not transmission. That was the excuse that was used for years. But you can clearly see, at least in New South Wales, that the transmission is going to be there. Project Energy Connect is getting energised now in New South Wales. HumeLink is getting built. Arana is getting built. I mean, there's no doubt about that. The approval you mentioned.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. No, keep going, David. Sorry.
You mentioned Spark. I mean, it's just about got its environmental approvals as far as I know, well on the way. Other projects down there have already got approvals. They've got CISs for whatever they're worth. More importantly, in Arana, there's a minor problem with Valley of the Winds. There's an appeal by some knucklehead who doesn't even live there. Liverpool Range has got all its environmental approvals. I'm pretty sure Squadron's proceeding has got most of its approvals. The only problem is the financing, as far as I can see.
Yeah, but just remember that behind that sort of facade of your project's ready, we can be stumped by a single item, right? So to give you an example, and this is a very real example, project, I'm not going to mention names, etc., that I've looked at in the past, you've potentially got a route to site which you're looking at for oversize over mass for a transformer, and there's questions about it, in terms of the permit you've got. So then you're looking at an alternate route which potentially has a median that you need to cross. If you want to cross that median in New South Wales, you need to go to Transport for New South Wales and get a works authorisation deed, which is going to take you 12 to 18 months. And either you start that during the planning process and you delay financial close, or you take the risk of starting financial close and then potentially having a 12 to 18 month construction delay.
I agree with that up to a point, Shane. But I mean, we've had years of working through those problems. As far as the Port of Newcastle to Arana goes, there's a whole capital works program that's been approved and the route's mapped out. The funds have been allocated to it. It's just not that. I don't.
Well, yeah, I'm actually going to sort of come on Shane's side here, David, because I was just talking to someone the other day, and they've actually sort of had to drop their plans to go from the Port of Newcastle to the southwest of Southwest Renewable Energy Zone, and they've had to sort of map out a new route from Geelong.
Well, they're now looking at changing that entire route, and
exactly.
I think the point, David,
is that's the southwest though. That's not Arana, right? That's a
no,
different route.
but the issue with the Port of Newcastle though is that apparently it's reaching capacity and they can't be guaranteed to actually sort of get their stuff through there. And we're also hearing that in Queensland, those very issues that Shane is talking about, when they're coming down to the planning process now and the sort of the refiling of the planning process, they've got to sit down there and get approval for every single intersection and left-hand turn and right-hand turn and moving this and moving that.
Well, and as simple as moving, power pylons or changing this or that. And if you don't have that, when I go to try and get approval to $5 billion to build my wind farm, I get a big cross on some box on a technical due diligence, and then I can't get approval to build that. And the thing is that, one of the biggest challenges here is that the goalposts are not set in stone, right? So we're dealing with probably 20 to 50 different agencies constantly. And to give you an idea, like when we're going through planning processes, it's very common for guidelines for specific species and stuff to change partway through a process. So you can be 6 to 8 months through a 9-month process, get to month number 8, and then the guideline changes, and then you effectively play snakes all the way back down to month number 2, and you do another 6 months. And these projects are just continuously getting caught in these feedback loops where one of those 20 or 50 different things changes, and you've got to get, that next green tick in that box, which then means that things are harder. So I would agree that broadly projects look ready. And yes, there are absolutely challenges with, finance, with LGCs, inflation, etc., and that is very real. And I think that the real issue for projects that are at the later stage is more on the commercial side, more on the how do we get the capital side, but also a lot of these projects are still trying to get those final things because of the amount of hoops we have to jump through and the fact that the hoops keep moving.
So you don't think we will build any more new wind farms? We're stuffed.
I definitely do. And I think that there are a heap of really good projects which I'm hoping to see hit the market quite soon. My concern is that will it be enough, right? And to your point, when I look at the market, I mean, there's this, like, let's be honest, coal is going to close down, and it's going to close down somewhere between 2030 and 2035 for most of the generators, particularly in New South Wales. Queensland is kind of doing its own thing at the moment. When I look at data, for example, data from Rystad, one of the things that I think is happening, could be wrong, but one of the things I think is happening is that we're being lulled a little bit into this false sense of security by the number of projects in the market, the amount of gigawatts in the market, and the number of projects that are approved. But the reality is, when you look at the data, there's actually a lot of attrition between approved projects and projects that reach financial close. So from memory, the numbers were something like only 30% of approved projects in New South Wales achieve financial close, and maybe like 38 or 40% of solar farms achieve financial close. And then you look at the amount of gigawatts that have to replace the coal-fired power stations that are going out of the market. And to me, there's already an energy gap. So when you then start adding on the overlays of data centers, electrification, and all these other things, I agree with you that
you get back to the point I've already said. We're not starting enough projects and we're not getting enough projects to FID. What we're only arguing about is the reasons. And whilst I hear all the let me describe it, and you can chastise me later, as technical whinges about it, which have not stopped wind farms being built in the past, but seem to be stopping them today more than they used to. The real problem is we're not getting projects to financial close, and I want to say that the problem is that, as you say, the REC support has gone away, the costs have gone up, but the revenue opportunity has gone down. We're going to have oversupply during the transition. That's a definitional, because you can't close the coal until you've built the replacement supply. So taxpayers have to bear the difference and push us over the line in the same way that the home battery scheme, once it got going, I mean, let's bring back the REC. Let's bring back a proper PPA process where people bid prices that they actually will commit to and get their boards to sign off on. And let's just get on with it. And once we've built one or two projects and get the process running and the roads working and the bloody median strips done and the police can be pissed off, so we can just drive down the road like in China, then we can actually get the speed of the whole thing up, and the costs will come down through the learning rates the way that should do. And if we build smoothly a couple of 2 or 3 gigawatts a year, we'll get the job done. But the way we're going now, we're getting paralysis by analysis and not even getting to start.
Simples then. Look, I mean, it just comes back to one of the points that we've already made in this discussion, is that no one actually has responsibility for delivering on the target and getting there. And then we just don't get the visibility in the actual pricing. So there's two things which interest me. One is this new project in WA, which I think is significant for a bunch of reasons I might talk about later. Comes from another government contract, government-owned retailer, basically. And we don't have those in many states, and where we do have most of them in Queensland, they're not doing it because that government doesn't happen to like them. Shane, in New South Wales, ASL has talked about a bit more clarity over the bidding process for LTESs. The signal is don't necessarily come out with the lowest cost one. We want the ones that actually get the things over the line. Is there any sense that that's going to be helpful and actually achieve what they wanted to achieve?
Yeah, it's a really good point, Giles. And I did I actually read your guys' article the other day on it, and it was a bit of a breath of fresh air, to be honest. I all the way back 15 years ago went through the Renewable Energy Independent Power Producers Program in South Africa, which was one of the first competitive bidding processes in the world. And it was an interesting experience in the sense that one of the things I took away from it was competitive bidding processes are great to a point, but then what happens is that people start competing beyond the point that's helpful, because in order to win, they need to kind of get the lowest price. And getting the lowest price doesn't necessarily lead to solvent projects. So I think this idea from ASL of trying to get projects to bid reasonably to actually get them built is really smart, and it's fundamentally correct. My question is, how do you do that? And how do you assess the bidding behavior, and how do you assess what is commercially, reasonable? Because by the way, your hurdle rate and my hurdle rate might be completely different. And how does a third party assess that that's what you're doing and you haven't,
Well, I guess if you're a wind farm, 110 or 120 is the answer.
well, it depends on the size of the wind farm, the constituent costs, and all those other things. So
Yeah.
they should be able to tell that. And again, I think that it's great they're thinking that way. And the devil's probably in the detail, but we do need to be getting away from this thing of just trying to scrape projects through and get sticker numbers of the lowest price, because that's not how projects get built.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's just frustrating, as David has said. I mean, and you look through the AEMO connection scorecard, and it's interesting because they sort of talk about connections no longer being the main issue. It's sort of before that and the lead up to it. But you just see these like this huge pipeline, just the number of projects which are queuing and which are making inquiries, which are going through to the next stage, but then just simply not getting built. I mean, batteries are fine, but wind and solar are just still way
Well,
down on what's needed to actually be delivered.
and I think you're hitting on a couple of things there which are really important. One is that personally, one of my views of one of the biggest challenges in the market is the sheer amount of braggawatts that are in the market. And what I mean by that is the projects which are out there that look great but are never going to get built. And the reality is that there's so many projects like that it creates hype among all of the different stakeholders, from governments to councils to etc. I was chatting to a council the other day that said we've got 52 state significant developments in our jurisdiction. Honestly, quite a lot of those are not going to get built, but they're spending time on all these things which distracts from projects that will get built. So that's a fundamental issue. And I think we really need to solve those kind of things to actually push through the projects that will get built.
Waste everyone's time. One more question before we do wrap up. And we kind of mentioned about sort of competition in the market and this wind farm. I have to name it now. The Narrogin wind farm in WA is going to be built by Neoen, and it's actually quite interesting because it's the first grid-connected wind farm that will be supplied by Envision, which is a new Chinese competitor in the market. And that's quite an interesting dynamic. And it seems that prices haven't really moved over the last few years because it's been dominated by a couple of sort of Western countries, and Goldwood hasn't really needed to. I mean, it's probably cheaper, but it hasn't needed to undercut them very much. Are you seeing any signs? I mean, I'm sort of hearing whispers that, maybe the pricing has sharpened a little bit because of the arrival of this new player, and that they've got a deal with Neoen, which has been arguably Australia's most successful wind developer over the last decade. They've got a supply deal with Fortescue, who are also pretty determined to do things. I just think that's a really interesting dynamic.
Yeah, look, and I think it's always helpful to have healthy competition in a market, right? So, I think that's really great, and I think it will help. The more we have different options, the better. The more we have flexibility to choose those different options, the better. And sorry, Giles, just to go back to the AMO scorecard, one of the things I forgot is that the other thing with the AMO scorecard, and I did bring this up with AMO when I was chatting to them, which unfortunately I think gets hidden a little bit in previous iterations, and that is being hidden in the market, is that the huge build out of batteries or firming is actually hiding a generation problem. And the reality is that batteries without generation don't make sense. So it's great that we have all these batteries and this dispatchability and firming coming out, and it will really, really help. But in the end, we actually need generation in the market, because when coal goes out and when these data centers and things come in, we need electrons to keep Australia moving forward and to create, the future that we all want to see.
Okay. So just two quick questions at the end there. So are you seeing any sort of price changes at all as you're sort of moving around the industry and sort of talking to people? And two, I mean, are data centers going to make a big difference?
Both good questions. On the price side, I am seeing some signals that there are possibly improvements. I think that I've got a lot of faith in solar battery hybrids, and I think that that's a really interesting space. would be awesome to see more movement on the wind side downward and see more projects getting built. Will data centers make a difference? Absolutely. The only question is, what difference do they make? I think that, data centers to some extent have been compared to hydrogen and where it was 5 years ago. I think most people in the market believe that data centers are much more real than potentially hydrogen was. I think the question is just, when are they coming? How many are coming? And, how much energy are they going to use?
Well, we'll find out soon enough, maybe. Next week will be an energy ministers meeting, and they'll be deciding if and how they can actually implement this requirement for data centers to sort of bring their own additional wind and solar. So we'll see how that goes.
Well, can I just wrap up on 2 very quick points, Giles?
Sure.
One is, we have to stop letting perfect become the enemy of good enough, right? So there is a point where we just need to keep moving, and good decisions are better than perfect decisions if they're made early enough. The second point is that we really need to focus on outcomes. And I genuinely believe that the outcomes that all of us want to see, no matter of, our personal affiliations or what stakeholder group we represent, are effectively the same thing. So the question is, how do we take that, wrap it in a bow, and deliver on it?
Okay. Well, Shane, look, thank you very much for joining us. It's been very good to chat, and good luck with the new shingle, as it were. And
thanks.
Yes, if you don't get things built, we'll be coming banging on your door and asking why.
Awesome. Let's do it. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Shane.
Thanks, Giles.
Cheers.
Invest in a low-carbon future through a diversified portfolio of environmentally conscious investments across multiple asset classes, all within the convenience of a single unit. Generate competitive returns while supporting both your portfolio and the planet. If you want to invest in the environment, think of the Enviro Invest Investment Fund. The Enviro Invest Investment Fund is a corporate representative of Daylight Financial Group, AFSL 521404. Past performance is no indicator of future performance. Read the information memorandum for more details at enviroinvest.com.au.
That was Shane Quinnell from Essence Consulting. David, news of the week. Look, I mentioned this during the interview with Shane, just the contract win by Envision for the Narrogin wind farm in Western Australia. I know it's only small, 179 megawatts. It's in Western Australia, not part of the national electricity market, but it's one of 4 PPAs that have been written by the state government, who suddenly realised that they've got coal-fired power stations closing at the end of the decade. At least they've got a firm date. And are now busily trying to make sure that they've got the wind and solar capacity. They've got a lot of batteries already, and just sort of topping up the wind and solar to make sure they're not falling short. But I thought it was interesting. This is a new play. We actually had Pete Cowling from Envision on here about a year ago. The biggest turbines we've ever seen in Australia, and I'm going to actually make a bit of a guess and say they're probably the lowest cost, because new market player, trying to strike a few contracts. Could this make a difference? Could this be the thing that makes the
Well done to
industry
Pete
move?
Cowling is what we'll say. Is you put a good salesman on the job, and guess what? You sell something.
Well, look, that's exactly right. Must it come down then to state governments intervening and actually sort of landing these projects? Because if you look at the, you've got 4 now underway in Western Australia. You've got 2 in South Australia. You've got 1 in Victoria, which was backed by the state government-owned SEC. That's the Delburn Wind Project. And as we pointed out, not much else happening anywhere. There's very, very few buyers out there, apart from Fortescue up in the Pilbara and Rio Tinto around Gladstone.
As I've pointed out, the New South Wales government, it's in its own commercial interest now to make sure things get done in this state, because New South Wales taxpayers are effectively, and consumers are on the hook for all the transmission that's been committed in this state and is getting built, and will have to be paid for. And right now, there's no generation to pay for it.
No, well, look, that's exactly right. Yes. We've got a couple of people movements as well.
Now, you mentioned data centres, and everyone's
Yes.
jumping up and down about data centres and electricity costs. But meanwhile, coal mining is the biggest consumer of diesel in Australia, consumes 12% of Australia's diesel, and also is a reasonable consumer of electricity. And do we have the Prime Minister taking responsibility for getting electricity costs managing them in the coal mining industry, or getting the diesel costs down? Now, I know some politician called Jeremy Laxale, I hope I pronounced his name correctly, has just seen a motion passed at the conference that says something like the Labor Party doesn't support any taxes or policies that are going to slow down the transition. But I wonder...
Sorry, I burst out laughing.
Oh, you did laugh, do you? Do you think that's funny, do you?
Well, no, I think it's ironic.
Yes, because at the moment, what have we really got? We've got a safeguards policy that seems to be safeguarding the oil and gas industry. We've got a diesel tax rebate, which is encouraging diesel consumption pretty much definitionally. We've got, and we've got pretty much no policies that are effectively supporting large-scale renewables. Now, I know that people will turn around and talk about the CIS, but and I ideally wish I could say otherwise, but at the moment the CIS is a flop.
Yes.
And that's the real problem at the moment. And as I pointed out in the interview with Shane, in the end, we've got a Queensland government that is anti-renewables.
We may have a Victorian government which is equally anti-renewables.
Well, certainly the prospects need to be watched very closely there. So a lot of the load is coming back, and we need to, it's really not that hard. That's what's so irritating about it. It is just not that hard. You put some money up there, the bloody things will get built, the coal will close, we can then point to get the data centres coming more easily, we can get rid of the diesel. It's actually a great national policy that you could mostly get behind, and that would increase our productivity, and just needs someone to wave a big flag and a signal and put some muscle into it.
Well, someone to have a responsibility and get things done, but I think we've said that probably a couple of times in this podcast already, and the levels of frustration are not falling anytime soon. David, let's talk about a couple of other things. Just on the people movements, I'm just interested that Tim Nelson from the Nelson Review is turning up at Snowy Hydro as head of markets, which is an interesting move, and maybe Snowy Hydro may emerge playing a critical role in the repowering of the Tomago smelter in west of Newcastle. So we're waiting to hear more about that. We're also actually waiting for their final assessment of the cost reset that they undertook, which they said 10 months ago would take 9 months. So
there's a very old saying that I'm sure you're well aware of in markets, which is that good news travels quickly, but bad news travels very slowly.
Doesn't travel so much. Yes, yeah, and then the other one is the CFC. Has a new leader. Ian Learmonth is stepping aside, and Paul McCartney, not the bass player, not the Beatle.
I think the CFC's done a reasonable job. Without ever sort of pushing too hard. You know what I mean? Like it's like everything else. The commitments often seem to be a lot bigger than the actual spending. But what else can you say? I mean, it is just so frustrating. We could have had the whole conversation we've had today. Things have barely changed in 12 months, except home batteries have come to the fore, and we've seen more utilities batteries actually come online. But everyone knew those utility batteries would come online, and actually the rate of new batteries being financed is slowing down because there's no price signal for them either. Origin coal is no closer to being replaced. Nothing has been built to replace your lawn in Victoria of any meaningful size. Gladstone Power Station wasn't running that hard, but the Queensland government's actually got a problem because Rio wants to power Boyne Island, but the firming for that was going to come from Barumba, and if you wait for Barumba to be built, you'll probably be waiting for a good while. The whole thing, people complain about the lack of productivity and the government not doing things fast enough. But I mean, gee whiz, the private sector is hardly doing very much itself, is it?
No, well, it's not. Well, it's kind of stranded without buyers, and we mentioned at the start of this conversation the buyers who are out there, and we need more of them. And perhaps they need to be government, and perhaps someone needs to be accountable and responsible. And
A few years ago, we could talk about people building projects at Merchant. I mean, Golden Plains was built as a merchant project, right? It didn't have a PPA when it started.
You don't get many of those people brave enough or deep enough pockets to do that. So,
but it's worked out, as far as I know, it's worked out
it's worked
reasonably
out
well.
brilliantly. Yeah, absolutely. In fact, they just installed the last of their turbines last week. So that was a good thing and a good milestone. So, yes, indeed. Okay. Just on batteries, just interesting to see that some of the different technologies are now being considered. We've also had lithium ion phosphate, and what have you. Just noticed the other day that AGL is talking about new battery. I just can't quite remember where it was, but sort of talking about the possibility of either being lithium ion or sodium. You've got the WA government looking to do vanadium flow batteries in Kalgoorlie. Want to support the vanadium industry, but it'll be interesting to see what they're. And you look very dismissive, David. But I'm
no doubt the vanadium flow battery will be built, but I cannot see that. I can understand sodium. There's quite a lot of support for sodium batteries, and some of the numbers and the things that have been reported are quite supportive. Vanadium flow batteries have had years and years and years to get a run on, and they haven't done it. Personally, I think you're brave if you're going there.
Well, there you go. Or you're a gold miner. And I'd just like to congratulate Gina Reinhardt on another successful investment in Lynas Rare Earths, which has achieved a renewable share of 90% over the June quarter, which makes for an average of 93% wind and solar over the 6 months. And that's for the Mount Weld mine with their off-grid thing. So you can hate renewables as much as you want, but sometimes actually do good things. And it's eliminated their diesel costs, at least for the power generation. All they've got to do now is swap it out for their diesel trucks. There you go.
Well, I've said my piece. We've got an absolute lay-down misere opportunity in Australia to get rid of oil, to get rid of the coal generation, and it's just falling over for next to nothing. It's pretty much like the England soccer team who only got to hold out for 5 minutes but can't be bothered to make the effort.
I think you need to go and find a Greek god, David, to usher you through the next phase of this transition. So we're going to close it here. You're going to go and catch a train. You're going to go and see Odysseus and report back next week to see whether you enjoyed it or not. Thank you very much for listening. Thanks, of course, to our sponsors, Pylon and Janus Electric.
And congratulations to Janus Electric, if we didn't say that already, because they did a new deal. Did we mention that last week?
We mentioned one of their deals, but not all the deals. Yeah, they just they've lifted. God, they've gone from like 4 to 87 truck orders in California, I think.
And I think this is something we probably should discuss a little bit more, is the electrification of the Los Angeles port. Anyway, let's see if we can't get a bit more on that, because that's another very interesting project and a great opportunity for electrification. And if we look at what Newvolt is doing, that's around truck container lorries around the Port of Melbourne. If we look at one of the big retailers is now starting to do a lot more electric short-haul final delivery electric trucks. I can't remember. I think that might have been Coles or Woolworths.
Australia Post.
Australia Post is doing stuff, and my favourite, New Energy, in which I'm an investor, has also got contracts and sites, and is progressing very rapidly. So there's quite a lot happening under the surface, and more preconditions are being fulfilled. That again, if national policy and objectives, and we've got to move on, we could actually accelerate this whole thing and get up to China speed and overtake China, and hold ourselves up as having done a really good thing and made a better future for everyone going forward.
That's a nice way to end it. We'll be back with another episode of the Energy Insiders podcast next week, and that's all for now. Thanks for listening.
Energy Insiders was brought to you by Pylon. Pylon provides easy-to-use solar design software for installers and retailers with pay-as-you-go pricing, no monthly cost and no lock-in contracts. Australia's top solar companies trust Pylon to design high-resolution, CEC-ready solar proposals. Energy Insiders was also brought to you by Janus Electric. By converting existing diesel trucks to electric, and supporting them with battery swap infrastructure, Janus is helping freight operators cut emissions, lower fuel and operating costs, and extend the life of their vehicles.